Right, we're back on the usual format today, chaps. Yesterday, a little bit of a hiccup. You don't need to know the details, but I hope you enjoyed a little glimpse behind the scenes at just how incompetent and bad at this I really am, and just what a potty mouth I have when I don't think anyone's watching. But let's go on, because you see, now we've missed a day since the last instalment of the story, the Premature Burial. We've done two parts, one remain. Today shall be the final instalment of this gripping little tale, and I do hope you enjoy it, and I do hope you continue to watch these little outputs that I create, to like them, to share them, subscribe to them, comment on them, all that nonsense. Let me know that you're there. Let's keep doing this silliness and try to forget that we're all locked in our own homes, shall we? Wouldn't that be marvellous? So, with that in mind, my friends, the final part of this week's story. Enjoy, enjoy, enjoy. You may recall that when last we were here, the hero of our story was just such person who suffered from these cataleptic trances, which have been responsible for so many individuals being buried before their times. And if you'll recall, right at the end of the last installment, he found himself in that foggy state of mind which suggested that he was in just such a state. And from that state, you may recall, he had felt an icy hand upon his forehead, and a gibbering voice whispered the word "arise" from within his ear. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, here we are for The Premature Burial by Edgar Allan Poe, Part 3. I sat erect. The darkness was total. I could not see the figure of him who had aroused me. I could call to mind neither the period at which I had fallen into the trance, nor the locality in which I then lay. While I remained motionless and busied in endeavours to collect my thoughts, the cold hand grasped me fiercely by the wrist, shaking it petulantly, while the gibbering voice said again, "Arise! Did I not bid thee arise?" "And who," I demanded, "art thou?" "I have no name in the regions which I inhabit," replied the voice mournfully. "I was mortal, but am fiend. I was merciless, but am pitiful. Thou dost feel that I shudder, my teeth chatter as I speak, yet it is not with the chilliness of the night without end, but this hideousness is insufferable. How canst thou tranquilly sleep? I cannot rest for the cry of these great agonies. These sights are more than I can bear. Get thee up. Come with me into the outer night, and let me unfold to thee the graves. Is not this a spectacle of woe? Behold!" I looked, and the unseen figure, which still grasped me by the wrist, had caused to be thrown open the graves of all mankind, and from each issued the faint phosphoric radiance of decay, so that I could see into the innermost recesses, and there view the shrouded bodies in their sad and solemn slumbers with the worm. But alas, the real sleepers were fewer by many millions than those who slumbered not at all. And there was a feeble struggling, and there was a general and sad unrest, and from out the depths of the countless pits there came a melancholy rustling from the garments of the buried. and of those who seemed tranquilly to repose, I saw that a vast number had changed, in a greater or lesser degree, the rigid and uneasy position in which they had originally been entombed. And the voice again said to me as I gazed, "Is it not, oh, is it not a pitiful sight?" But before I could find words to reply, the figure had ceased to grip my wrist. The phosphoric lights expired, and the graves were closed with a sudden violence, while from them arose a tumult of despairing cries, saying again, "Is it not, O God, is it not a very pitiful sight?" Well, fantasies such as these, presenting themselves at night, extended their terrific influence far into my waking hours. My nerves became thoroughly unstrung, and I felt a prey to perpetual horror. I hesitated to ride or walk, or to indulge in any exercise that would carry me from home. In fact, I no longer dared trust myself out of the immediate presence of those who were aware of my proneness to catalepsy, lest, falling into one of my usual fits, I should be buried before my real condition could be ascertained. I doubted the care, the fidelity of my dearest friends. I dreaded that in some trance of more than customary duration they might be prevailed upon to regard me as irrecoverable. I even went so far as to fear that, as I occasioned much trouble, they might be glad to consider any very protracted attack as sufficient excuse for getting rid of me altogether. It was in vain they endeavoured to reassure me by the most solemn promises. I exacted the most sacred oath that under no circumstances would they bury me until composition had so materially advanced as to render further preservation impossible. And even then my mortal terrors would listen to no reason, would accept no consolation. I entered into a series of elaborate precautions. Among other things, I had the family vault so remodelled as to admit to being readily opened from within. The slightest pressure upon a long lever that extended far into the tomb would cause the iron portals to fly back. There were arrangements also for the free admission of air and light, and the convenient receptacles for food and water within immediate reach of the coffin intended for my reception. This coffin was warmly and softly padded, and provided with a lid fashioned upon the principle of the vault door, with the addition of springs so contrived that the feeblest movement of the body would be sufficient to set it at liberty. Besides all this, there was suspended from the roof of the tomb a large bell, the rope of which it was designed would extend through a hole in the coffin, and so be fastened to one of the hands of the corpse. But alas, what avails the vigilance against the destiny of man? Not even these well-contrived securities suffice to save from the uttermost agonies of living inhumation a wretch to these agonies foredoomed. There arrived an epoch, a time in which I found myself emerging from total unconsciousness into the first feeble and indefinite sense of existence. Slowly, with a tortoise gradation, approached the faint grey dawn of the physical day. A torpid uneasiness, an apathetic endurance of dull pain, no care, no hope, no effort. Then, after a long interval, a ringing in the ears. Then, after a lapse still longer, a pricking and tingling sensation in the extremities. Then a seemingly eternal period of pleasurable quiescence, during which the awakening feelings are struggling into thought. and then a brief re-sinking into non-entity, then a sudden recovery. At length, the slight quivering of an eyelid, and immediately thereupon an electric shock of terror, deadly and indefinite, which sends the blood in torrents from the temples to the heart, and now the first positive effort to think, and now the first endeavour to remember. And now a partial and evanescent success, and now the memory has so far gained its dominion that in some measure I am cognizant of my state. I feel that I am not awakening from ordinary sleep. I recollect that I have been subject to catalepsy, and now at last, as if by the rush of an ocean, my shuddering spirit is overwhelmed by the one grim danger, by the one spectral and ever-prevalent idea. For some minutes after this fancy possessed me, I had remained without motion. And why? I could not summon the courage to move. I dared not make the effort which was to satisfy me of my fate, and yet there was something at my heart which whispered to me it was sure. Despair, such as no other species of wretchedness ever calls into being. Despair alone urged me, after long irresolution, to uplight the heavy lids of my eyes. I uplifted them. It was dark, all dark. I knew that the fit was over. I knew that the crisis of my disorder had long passed. I knew that I had now fully recovered the use of my visual faculties, and yet it was dark, all dark. The intense and utter raylessness of the night that endureth for evermore. I endeavoured to shriek, and my lips and my parched tongue moved convulsively together in the attempt, but no voice issued from the cavernous lungs, which, oppressed as if by the weight of some incumbent mountain, gasped and palpitated with the heart at every elaborate and struggling inspiration. The movement of the jaws in this effort to cry aloud showed me that they were bound up, as is usual with the dead. I felt, too, that I lay upon some hard substance, and by something similar my sides were also closely compressed. So far I had not ventured to stir any of my limbs, but now I violently threw up my arms, which had been lying at length at my side with the wrists crossed. They struck a solid wooden substance, which extended above my person at an elevation of not more than 6 inches from my face. I could no longer doubt that I reposed within a coffin at last. And now, amid all my infinite miseries, came sweetly the cherub hope, for I thought of my precautions. I writhed and made spasmodic exertions to force open the lid. It would not move. I felt my wrists for the bell rope. It was not to be found. And now the comforter fled for ever, and a still sterner despair reigned triumphant. For I could not help perceiving the absence of all the padding which I had so carefully prepared. And then, too, there came suddenly to my nostrils the strong, peculiar odour of moist earth. The conclusion was irresistible. I was not within the vault. I had fallen into a trance while absent from home, while among strangers, when or how I could not remember. And it was they who had buried me as a dog, nailed up in some common coffin and thrust deep, deep and forever into some ordinary and nameless grave. As this Awful conviction forced itself thus into the innermost chambers of my soul. I once again struggled to cry aloud, and in this second endeavour I succeeded. A long, wild, and continuous shriek or yell of agony resounded from the realms of the subterranean night. "Hello! Hello there!" said a gruff voice in reply. "What the devil's the matter now?" said a second. "Get out of that," said a third. "What do you mean by yowling out here at this style?" said a fourth. And hereupon I was seized and shaken without ceremony for several minutes by a junto of very rough-looking individuals. They did not arouse me from my slumber, for I was wide awake when I screamed, but they restored me to the full possession of my memory. This adventure happened near Richmond, Virginia. Accompanied by a friend, I had proceeded upon a gunning expedition some miles down the bank of the James River. Night approached, and we were overtaken by a storm. The cabin of a small sloop laying at the anchor in the stream and laden with garden mould afforded us the only available shelter. Well, we made the best of it and passed the night on board. I slept in one of the only 2 berths in the vessel, and the berths of a sloop of 60 or 70 tons need barely be described. That which I occupied had no bedding of any kind. Its extreme width was 18 inches. The distance from the bottom of the deck to overhead was precisely the same. I found it a matter of exceeding difficulty to squeeze myself in. Nevertheless, I slept soundly, and the whole of my vision, for it was no dream and no nightmare, arose naturally from the circumstances of my position, from my ordinary bias of thought, and from the difficulty to which I have alluded of collecting my senses, and especially of regaining my memory for a long time after awaking from slumber. The men who shook me were the crew of the sloop and some labourers engaged to unload it. From the load itself came the earthy smell. The bandage about the jaws was a silk handkerchief which I had bound upon my head in default of my customary nightcap. The tortures endured, however, were indubitably quite equal for the time to those of actual sepulture. They were fearfully, they were inconceivably hideous. But out of evil proceeded good. For their very excess wrought in my spirit an inevitable revulsion. My soul acquired tone, acquired temper. I went abroad, I took vigorous exercise, I breathed the free air of heaven. I thought upon other subjects than death. I discarded my medical books. Buchan I burnt. I read no night thoughts, no fustian about churchyards, no bugaboo tales such as this. In short, I became a new man and lived a man's life. From that memorable night I dismissed for ever my charnel apprehensions, and with them vanished the cataleptic disorder, of which perhaps they had been less the consequence than the cause. There are moments when, even to the sober eye of reason, the world of our sad humanity may assume the semblance of hell. But the imagination of man is no Carathis to explore with impunity its every cavern. Alas, the grim legion of sepulchral terrors cannot be regarded as altogether fanciful, but, like the demons in whose company Afrasiab made his voyage down the Oxus, they must sleep or they will devour us. They must be suffered to slumber, or we perish. Well, there we have it then, my friends. Quite the unexpectedly upbeat ending there, I'm sure you'll agree, and something that we can all take away from this, I'm sure. Don't be morbid, all bad things will happen. I don't know, I wasn't really paying attention. Nevertheless, hope you enjoyed it. I did. I'll see you tomorrow. Let's do some more of this, shall we? It's happening whether you like it or not. Please like it. Like me. I do so like to be liked.